Our next speaker today is Kim Walters, and she's going to talk about the Charles Lummis collection of cylinder recordings. And I'm especially interested to hear this presentation. The Lummis collection is really one of the most important collections of cylinders in California, and I'm really interested to hear what she has to say today. And Kim Walters is the director of the Braun Research Library and the curator of special collections and archives at the Autry National Center Southwest Museum. She's enjoyed more than 26 years of library management and has worked at the Autry Center for more than 20 years. As director of the Braun Research Library, Kim oversees the daily operations of the Braun, identifying preservation and access projects, and is responsible for working with researchers. She works closely with American Indians who used a manuscript, photo, and sound recording archives. Walters is also curator and special collections of curator of special collections and archives. In this position, she is involved with the curatorial teams for the Southwest Museum of the American Indian. She has curated 19 exhibitions, gosh, it's a lot of work, and including the People of California Hall, which opened in 2005, and 4,000 Years of Pueblo Pottery. Please welcome Kim Walters.
I feel kind of strange. Now I'm going to take you back almost 90 years in recording. Let me go to the next.
Adiós, amores, cantada por la señorita Silvia. Adiós, adiós, amores, adiós, pequeño centro, con tanto sentimiento, tú me has dado a mí.
Charles Lummis was the founder of the Southwest Museum, and he dedicated much of his life to the preserving of cultures that he felt were vanishing. Like a number of Americans at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, Lummis was convinced that the Native American lifeways were on the road to extinction. He also believed that the modernity was dooming the traditional culture of the Hispanic peoples of the Southwest. Unlike many of his contemporaries, however, Lummis lamented these developments and worked to preserve at least some of the records of Indian and Hispanic cultures. In 1903, his goal led him to establish the Southwest Society, Western branch of the Archaeological Institute of America. Ultimately, he hoped to turn the organization into a museum, which he did at the end of the 1907, forming the Southwest Museum, which is the oldest museum in the city of Los Angeles. In 1905, he titled an article, "Catching Archaeology Alive." Lummis sought to persuade the Archaeological Institute of America that his quote-unquote large-scale folk song of the Southwest Project was archaeology. To those in the organization who thought otherwise, Lummis assured them that in 10 years, it will be, if not recorded now, the songs would be dead and gone as the rest. The challenge, he asserted, was to catch our archaeology alive. Key to the project was to save by recording the traditional music of the Southwest Indians as well as Hispanic cultures. Lummis's first introduction to the Southwestern folk songs dated to his tramp. I don't know how many of you know, but he walked from Ohio to Los Angeles in 1884. He developed a greater understanding and interest in the Spanish folk songs when he was recuperating from a stroke in the late 1880s. Living in New Mexico, at that time he started to record the lyrics of folk songs in his diaries and notebooks. His first published article about New Mexican folk songs appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine in 1890. He followed this with more extended descriptions of the songs in his book in 1893, Land of Poco Tiempo. In early 1904, he purchased an Edison recorder, horn, and cylinders for $44.25 from H.C. Fisk, Jr. of Los Angeles, and he began his recordings. Needing someone to transcribe these recordings, he began to work with Albert Stanley, a professor of music from University of Michigan. But he wanted someone who would be more devoted to the transcriptions, and to his fortune, he met Arthur Farwell, a noted composer and publisher of music, at a lecture he gave in January 1904. The Archaeological Institute of America provided the financial assistance which enabled Farwell to come to California during several summers to work with Lummis on the project. I have one invoice in the archives for Farwell for his first month of work from July to August 1905, and he was paid $50 for his transcriptions. Over the next few years, he transcribed and harmonized several hundred of the songs. Not just the Hispanic folk songs, but he did try to do some of the Native American songs as well. Lummis continued to provide updates on reports of the project's progress to the Southwest Society meetings and into his annual reports to the Archaeological Institute of America. He kept promising a songbook was forthcoming, but it took almost 20 years to publish just 14 of the more than 450 California Hispanic folk songs. In the next slide, this is the cover of the songbook. And I'm going to quote a passage. It's kind of long, but I think it takes the heart of Lummis and why he felt this was so important. This is open quote. Personally, I feel that we who today inherit California are under the familial obligation to save whatever we may of the incomparable romance which has made the name California a word to conjure with 400 years. I feel that we cannot decently dodge a certain trusteeship to save the old missions from ruin and the old songs from oblivion. And I am convinced that from a purely selfish standpoint, our musical repertory is in crying need of enrichment, more by heartfelt musicians than by tailor-made ones, more from folk songs than from potboilers. For 38 years, I've been collecting the old songs of the Southwest, beginning long before the phonograph, but utilizing that in later years. I have thus recorded more than 450 unpublished Spanish songs and know many more in my attic. I was barely in time, the very people who taught them to me have mostly forgotten them or died, and few of their children know them. But it is a sin and a folly to let each song perish. We need them now, close quote. And that, I don't know if you know Lummis, but that certainly characterizes him with everything that he did in his life. There are numerous singers in the collection, and Lummis knew many people, and he was always able to get most of them to do what he wanted. He had a charismatic personality, although he was not a wealthy man. He was nostalgic about the past. He romanticized about the California families and their existence prior to California joining the Union. The singers he hired for Hispanic music recordings were from various backgrounds and California families in the Los Angeles region. Among all of the recordings were done at his home, El Alisal, which is north of us here in Highland Park. One of the most prolific singers was Manuela Garcia, whose family lived in an adobe on South Olive Street here in Los Angeles. She recorded in 1904 and 1905. She recorded approximately 150 songs for Lummis. And I've also found in the archives statements of payment where Lummis paid her anywhere between $4 to $20 for her recording sessions. Musicologist John Kogel, who's at Cal State Fullerton now, has theorized that many of the songs that Manuela recorded are more recent to California, coming with Mexican immigration in the second half of the 19th century. In addition to singing for Lummis, she also gave him her notebook containing the words of 149 songs, many of which she recorded for him.
La Copa del Veneno, canción mexicana cantada por don Rosendo Uruchurtu. Yo voy a preparar la copa llena de un veneno que acabe mi existencia.
During the recordings, Manuela was also accompanied by Rosendo Orochutu, who you're hearing singing. Her sister Mercedes also recorded a few of the songs. And as you can hear in this one, Rosendo did his own recording. He was a blind musician, and he also developed his own guitar. And just a little aside, we were talking about archives and the long connection that an organization that's 100 years old has. I had the granddaughters of Mercedes, the great nieces of Manuela, come in to listen to the recordings and read the correspondence between the family and Lummis. And then during their visit, they then turned over more family material to us because of that connection.
Adiós amores, cantada por la señorita Silvia. Adiós, adiós amores, adiós porque yo siento con tantos sentimientos.
It's one of my favorites. The sisters, Rosa and Luisa Villa, that you see here in this, their family came to Los Angeles in 1846 from Baja California. They were also prominent contributors to the collection. They sang and played guitar and mandolin for Lummis, recording about 20 pieces. They were also influential in the Romantic revival of the California dances. The sisters continued to perform the songs at an annual fiesta that was held at the Southwest Museum's Casa de Adobe in the late 1930s.
A tus adoradores, jamás les sabes dar. Por eso ya no quiero amar más en la vida. A mi patria querida me voy a retirar.
Another well-known family, their early California family from up just north of Los Angeles, the Duvalier family from Rancho Cumulas, which is in Piru, California. Lummis spent a long time, actually, with the family, starting in 1884 and 1885. They contributed 22 songs. And you can see this is the sisters, Nina and Susie Duvalier. They also taught Lummis traditional dances. I should say, an aside, all of the photographs that I'm showing you are from the archives, and they were all taken by Lummis. This is Adelaida Camp. I don't have one of her songs. Adelaida was an elderly woman from Ventura, actually, when Lummis knew her. She recorded about 60 songs. She descended from the Higuaro family, which arrived in California in the 1780s. Adelaida's songs represent some of the oldest extant in the collection from California. She grew up learning songs in her household, where Jose de la Rosa, better known as Don Pepe, a popular musician, singer, and composer, resided. He is credited with being California's first professional printer. De la Rosa came to California in 1833 with the Hiar Padre Party. Although he didn't like to share his material with others, he was so impressed with Adelaida that he willed her, now this is an important point, he willed her his songbooks. Camp in turn transcribed her own songs, which she left the word book to Lummis, but she sold Jose de la Rosa's notebook to Lummis, and I found this in the archives, for $10. I just think it's a little interesting aside. So the collection contains a trove of information for scholars. It includes serenades associated with rancho life and nursery songs from mission schools. Some of the recordings by Garcia, Camp, and Orochutu include Spanish versions of Italian operas and arias, European art songs, and songs from foreign phonograph recordings. These songs have diverse origins and multiple influences of song traditions from Mexico, Latin America, and Europe. According to the late Dr. Michael Heisley, who is the curator of folklore at the Southwest Museum, this is a quote from him, "One of the unique characteristics of the collection is the information about the performance styles, vocal nuances, and instrumental accompaniment audible in the recordings. Few folk song collections of this period offer researchers such rich possibilities for studying this range of extensive modes of traditional singing. Heisley continues to state that Lummis was a pioneering folklorist, that he combined elements of the emerging scholarly disciplines of folklore and ethnology and an amateur's fascination with the past and its preservation. Lummis's writings also show an influence of the newly developing discipline of anthropology, but he still had a romantic attraction to the Southwest that is illuminated in his writings on Mexican-American folk songs and folklore. Lummis's never-ending effort to look at this culture provides in contribution to the development of regional identity, close quote. In addition to the Hispanic songs, and I don't have any of them for you to listen to today because we've got a clear cultural sensitivity, we have several hundred Native American songs from 23 different tribes. Here we find notable Serrano bird songs and songs from Isleta Pueblo. The Isleta recordings are in Tiwa, Navajo, Hopi, and Spanish, and they were performed by Ramon Zuni and Procopio Montoya, both from Isleta, but Lummis brought them out, and they were working for him at El Alasal. The other Native American songs that Lummis recorded were either done at Sherman Indian School or at the Mission Inn in Riverside. The entire wax cylinder collection contains 994 recordings, including the Spanish songs and the Isletan songs. The recordings made by Lummis are supplemented by other like-minded, in quotes, archaeologists. There are recordings by Frances Densmore, who was an ethnomusicologist who worked for the Smithsonian, and then she did work for the Southwest Museum, of Cheyenne, Arapaho, Maidu, and Santa Domingo Pueblo songs. The recordings also include turn-of-the-century commercial recordings of operas, marches, and other popular songs. The nice thing about the Lummis archives, not only do we have the sound recordings, but we have his manuscripts and his photographs. So and the documentation for the Spanish folk song project. We've been working for the last 20 years, and Michael's here, with the California Antique Phonograph Society to re-record the collection. But prior to that, the museum staff understood that they needed to move on into different preservation formats. So they started in the 1930s. Yale University recorded not the whole collection, but about 450 of the songs onto aluminum discs. Then in the 1940s, the Library of Congress recorded the cylinders again. So you keep saying we keep playing them onto vinyl discs. And then in the 60s, they were transferred onto reel-to-reel tapes. And those reel-to-reel tapes were then transferred onto cassettes. Now, thank goodness to CAPS and actually a project that Michael Heisley started. We started working with, this is Dan Reed and Mark Ulano and Dr. Michael Canchillian, and Dan Reed passed away. We started working with them actually in 1990. At that time, the preservation medium acceptance was, again, reel-to-reel, but now we're recording them using a special stylus that Michael had made in England onto actually directly into digital format. And I don't know how many of you know Dr. Michael Canchillian, but he also developed his restoration techniques at the Southwest Museum, Braun Library, for putting cylinders back together so that we can capture the sound. Another project that they did early on was, and you can see how we have them stored behind them in just cabinets, and the cabinets were never bolted, but we bolted them to the wall. This is Dan Reed, Michael Canchillian, Mark Ulano, and Dan Reed. Dan Reed on your right passed away, and Dan this current Dan is working on the project with Michael. We do know now, unlike Lummis's Lament, that the songs haven't died away. In fact, there are families and groups in Southern California, such as Los Californios of San Diego, who still recognize and perform many of the songs Lummis recorded. The Hispanic recordings will eventually be available for listening on our website. Before we can release any of the Native American songs to the internet, we will need to consult with each tribe represented in the sound recording collections. You are more than welcome to make an appointment to listen to the recordings that we have re-recorded. Currently, you have to come to the library, and you can also take a look at the musical transcriptions. And there's my contact information. And we also have the records for the sound recordings, the library cataloging records are available on the library. We have a collection highlight on the Autry National Center's website where we've got some of it's an opera collection highlight that we did last year, and some of the operas that they recorded are on there. We just yesterday, through the library, Los Angeles as Subject and KCET have a blog, and we just put up, in honor of ARSC's presentations, part of that, and you'll see some more photographs from the Braun and I listened to them, some other wonderful sound recordings from other sound archives here in Los Angeles. Thank you. Currently, and I've worked, as you know, 20 years now, most of the time the tribes haven't asked us to deny access on site to the songs, but most of them don't want them released to the internet because they don't want people appropriating them and doing things with them. They're pretty open. There are, and I'm sure once we get them recorded in, because not everything had been recorded into other formats. Once we get them recorded into other formats and then work with tribes, Native American songs can be individually owned, clan-owned, tribally owned. They can be religious or called daily life. So we work with each one on a case-by-case basis to try to address those issues. The sound recordings they just don't seem to want on the website. The photographs are where we actually have more issues to deal with. Yes?
Of the 14 California songs that were published in 1923, the Arthur Farwell arrangements, how many of those are preserved in the cylinders? Can you come and listen to them? Are they all there?
They're all there.
Do we have one more question for Kim? Thank you very much.
Thank you.